My parents smashed my ceramic plate directly into the expensive oak wall and shouted at the top of their lungs, calling me a worthless piece of trash and screaming at me to get out of my sister Cassidy's house immediately. The heavy porcelain shattered into dozens of sharp fragments, and the thick brown gravy splattered all over the tips of my steel-toed work boots. They aggressively humiliated me in front of 30 wealthy, high-society guests who simply stopped drinking their champagne and stared at me like I was a diseased, rabid animal that had somehow wandered indoors. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. On Monday morning, I calmly handed them a massive, devastating lawsuit that made them literally drop to their knees and beg for mercy. I was completely done being the designated family scapegoat. I am going to tell you exactly, step by step, how I systematically dismantled my toxic family's entirely fake empire, exposed my sister as a massive fraud, and took back absolutely everything that rightfully belonged to me. The horrible, violent sound of that thick ceramic plate shattering against the custom wood paneling is a sound that will be burned into my memory for the rest of my natural life. It echoed through the massive, high-ceiling dining room like a gunshot, instantly silencing the soft, elegant classical music that was playing from the hidden surround sound speakers. The polite, hushed laughter of the wealthy guests was completely cut off. For a long, agonizing moment, absolutely nobody breathed. 30 pairs of highly judgmental eyes turned in perfect unison to look directly at me. They stared at the disgusting mess of prime roasted beef, rich brown gravy, and red wine that was currently dripping down the pristine wall and pooling on the flawless hardwood floor, and then they slowly tracked their collective gaze all the way up to my heavily stained, dirty clothes. It was a Friday night, and the weather outside was bitterly cold. My younger sister, Cassidy, was throwing a massive, ridiculously expensive, fully catered engagement and networking party. She was officially celebrating her upcoming wedding to a man named Beckett. Beckett was not just any guy. He was the primary heir to a prominent and untouchably wealthy commercial real estate family headed by a ruthless billionaire named Winslow. Simultaneously, Cassidy was using this lavish gathering to try and secure a multi-million-dollar investment from Winslow for her supposedly revolutionary new fashion technology startup. The massive suburban house was filled to the absolute brim with people wearing custom-tailored silk suits, heavy diamond necklaces, and designer cocktail dresses that cost significantly more than the entire heavy-duty service truck I drove for a living. I, on the other hand, was standing near the kitchen archway wearing heavy brown canvas work pants, a faded gray flannel shirt, and a thick, worn-out utility jacket. My hands were heavily stained with black industrial grease and metallic dust, the exact kind of deep, set-in grime that no amount of harsh, burning chemical soap could ever fully wash away from the thick calluses and the permanent cracks in my skin. I am a 30-year-old woman, and I own and operate a massive, highly lucrative commercial heating, ventilation, and air conditioning contracting business. I had just spent 14 grueling, exhausting hours crawling through the freezing, cramped, and incredibly dangerous metal ductwork of a massive commercial meatpacking plant. I was repairing a catastrophic failure in an industrial refrigeration unit to prevent hundreds of thousands of dollars in perishable inventory from instantly rotting. I was physically and mentally exhausted. My muscles ached with every tiny movement. My lower back was screaming in a familiar, dull, throbbing pain, and literally all I wanted in the entire world was a scalding hot shower and my bed. I had only come to this ridiculous, pretentious party because my mother, Lorelei, had aggressively texted me at 6 in the morning. She had absolutely demanded that I drive all the way across town to a specialty liquor warehouse, pick up 4 wooden cases of a specific, incredibly expensive vintage French wine, and drop them off at the house before the catering staff arrived. I bought that wine with my own hard-earned money. I carried those heavy wooden boxes into the massive kitchen through the back service door, specifically so I would not disturb the fancy, wealthy guests mingling in the front parlor. The catering staff completely ignored me, naturally assuming I was just a dirty delivery driver. I was starving, having not eaten a single bite of food since 4 in the morning. I grabbed a spare white ceramic plate from the granite counter, put a single slice of roast beef and some grilled asparagus on it, and stepped near the edge of the dining room archway just to catch my breath and eat for 5 minutes before leaving through the back door. That was my fatal mistake. I existed in their direct line of sight. My mother saw me. Lorelei was wearing a shimmering emerald silk dress that probably cost more than my first set of industrial welding tools. She abruptly stopped her pleasant conversation with a wealthy investor, her face immediately twisting into an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She did not politely walk over to me to ask me to leave. She marched. And she did not lower her voice in the slightest. She wanted an audience. She desperately wanted every single wealthy person in that room to see exactly how swiftly and decisively she dealt with the ultimate embarrassment of her family. She stopped right in front of me, her sharp eyes darting from my grease-stained hands to my simple plate of food. Without a single second of hesitation, without any warning whatsoever, she raised her hand and violently slapped the plate right out of my grip. The heavy ceramic dish hit the wall and exploded. The hot gravy splattered onto my boots. "Do not dare to stain your sister's beautiful home with your filthy hands," my mother hissed, her voice incredibly loud and vibrating with a terrifying, self-righteous anger. "Look at you. You are completely ruining her image. You always ruin absolutely everything, Sloane. You worthless piece of trash. Get out of Cassidy's house right now before you cost her these investors." I froze. I could feel the intense, burning heat of profound humiliation rushing to my face. I looked over my mother's shoulder at my father, Thatcher. He was standing near the grand stone fireplace, casually holding a crystal glass of expensive scotch. He looked away, staring intently at a modern painting on the wall, completely ignoring the scene, implicitly supporting my mother's public cruelty through his absolute, cowardly silence. Then I looked at Cassidy. My golden child sister was standing right next to her beautiful, wealthy fiancé. She was wearing a custom-tailored designer gown, her hair perfectly styled, a heavy, glittering diamond engagement ring gleaming under the chandelier. She looked directly at me, gave a tiny, arrogant, victorious smirk, and slowly took a sip of her expensive champagne. She did not say a single word to defend me. I did not yell back. I did not throw a fit or cause a massive scene. I simply looked down at the disgusting mess on the expensive floor. I slowly crouched down, completely ignoring the sharp, shooting pain in my lower back, and began picking up the sharp pieces of broken porcelain with my bare, calloused hands. A small, jagged piece of sharp glass sliced deeply into my thumb, cutting right across an old, thick scar I had gotten from a severe welding accident years ago. A thick drop of dark red blood welled up and mixed with the spilled gravy on the floor. I stood up, holding the broken pieces in my bleeding hand. I walked over to the stainless steel garbage can, threw the pieces away, and wiped my hands on a cheap paper towel. I looked at my mother, then at my sister, making direct, piercing eye contact with both of them. I did not say a single word. I turned around and walked out the back door, stepping out into the cold, sharp night air. When I started the loud, rumbling engine of my rusty pickup truck and drove away into the darkness, they thought I was just a miserable, uneducated laborer who was bitterly jealous of my sister's incredible, rapid success. But as I gripped the worn steering wheel, driving away from that glowing mansion, a cold, hard, and terrifyingly calm realization settled deep into my chest. They had just violently thrown me out of Cassidy's house. But what they did not know, and what Cassidy had been desperately, frantically hiding from them for 4 long years, was that it was not Cassidy's house at all. The drive back to the industrial park took exactly 45 minutes. The suburban roads near the mansion were wide, perfectly paved, and lined with beautifully manicured oak trees. But as I drove further away from the wealthy estates, the scenery drastically shifted to cracked concrete, high chain-link fences topped with razor wire, and flickering, dying yellow streetlights. Every single bump in the uneven, neglected road shook the heavy suspension of my truck, and every violent jolt reminded me of the heavy, suffocating and familiar ache in my chest. I did not drive home to a nice, quiet suburban neighborhood with a white picket fence and a perfectly green lawn. I drove straight into the beating heart of the industrial district, pulling through the heavy sliding steel gates of my company's main equipment yard. I parked my truck next to a long row of commercial service vans, killed the rumbling engine, and walked up the exterior metal stairs to the practical loft apartment I had built right above the main warehouse floor. It was not a glamorous life by any stretch of the human imagination. My living room windows directly overlooked massive wooden pallets of copper tubing and heavy industrial compressors, but it was mine. I had built it with my own two hands, with my own blood, sweat, and thousands upon thousands of hours of backbreaking, completely exhausting labor. Yet, to my incredibly toxic family, I was nothing but an embarrassing, dirty stain on their fabricated legacy. As I sat on the edge of my simple mattress in the dark, my thumb throbbing with a dull, rhythmic pain from the deep cut, the bitter, haunting memories of my childhood flooded back into my mind, entirely uninvited and incredibly sharp. I have always been the invisible child in that family, the designated, permanent scapegoat. My parents, Thatcher and Lorelei, were obsessed with the illusion of being part of the cultural elite. They wanted a family of intellectuals, artists, and prominent socialites. When I sat them down at the dinner table when I was 18 years old and told my father I was not going to a 4-year university because I wanted to go to a trade school to learn commercial heating and refrigeration, he looked at me like I had just confessed to a violent, unforgivable crime. I remember his exact words. He told me I was a massive disgrace to our prestigious family line. He explicitly, coldly stated that manual labor was only for people who were simply not smart enough to use their brains. The contrast in how Cassidy and I were treated growing up was sickening and entirely unapologetic. If you walked through the massive, vaulted living room of the mansion they currently lived in, you would see a literal, curated museum dedicated entirely to Cassidy's existence. There were huge, professionally framed, high-resolution portraits of her graduating high school, her holding her college degree, her standing proudly next to her first luxury car. And me? There was exactly one tiny, wallet-sized, faded photo of me from when I was 12 years old, and it was awkwardly hidden behind a large potted fern near the television stand. But life has a very funny, highly ironic way of proving arrogant people wrong. While Cassidy spent her entire 20s partying in expensive college sororities, changing her major 6 different times, and bouncing from one failed, buzzword-heavy business idea to another while living entirely off my parents' maxed-out credit cards, I was working. I worked 80 to 90 hours a week in sweltering, suffocating heat and freezing, bone-chilling cold. I saved every single penny I earned, living off cheap noodles and bitter black coffee. Today, at 30 years old, my company is a highly lucrative, multi-million-dollar commercial contracting firm. I employ 30 highly skilled technicians. I secure massive, complex municipal and federal contracts. My company brings in over $8 million a year in revenue. I make more money in a single month than my father ever made in his absolute best year as a mid-level corporate manager. But my family did not know any of that. Because 4 years ago, their fake, upper-class world came crashing down. My father made a series of incredibly terrible, foolish, and risky investments, and the bank was aggressively foreclosing on their family home. They were completely, utterly bankrupt. They were exactly 1 week away from being physically thrown out onto the street. That was when Cassidy came to my industrial workshop in the pouring rain, crying hysterically and begging on her hands and knees. She told me that if our father lost the house and their wealthy social circle found out they were broke, his pride would be completely destroyed, and he might do something drastic. Cassidy begged me to buy the house from the bank. But there was a sick, twisted condition attached to her begging. She looked me dead in the eyes, tears streaming down her perfect face, and said, "Sloan, you absolutely cannot let Mom and Dad know you bought it. If Dad knows his blue-collar dropout daughter bailed him out while his golden child did nothing, the profound humiliation will kill him. Let me tell them I bought it. Let me tell them I used my early cryptocurrency investments to save the family and pay off the bank. Please, Sloan, I need to be the hero. Just help me." I was so incredibly stupid. I was so deeply, pathetically desperate for my family to just be okay, so desperate for a fleeting moment of peace and perhaps a silent, unspoken gratitude, that I agreed to the lie. I used a newly formed limited liability company to purchase the sprawling suburban property in pure cash, keeping my personal name completely hidden from all public county records. I let Cassidy take all the glorious, unearned credit. I let my parents weep with joy and truly believe their golden child had miraculously saved them from total ruin. I faded entirely into the background, secretly paying the massive $35,000 in annual property taxes every single year without a single complaint, while they lived in absolute luxury, worshipping the ground Cassidy walked on. I sacrificed my own recognition and massive amounts of my own money to protect their fragile, unearned egos. And tonight, my mother threw my hard-earned food against the wall and told me to get out of my own property. The ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. I barely slept a wink that night. I tossed and turned on my mattress, my mind obsessively replaying the loud sound of the shattering plate over and over again. I woke up at 5 on Saturday morning to the heavy, familiar sounds of diesel forklifts moving massive steel equipment pallets down in the yard below my window. I dragged myself out of bed, made a pot of strong, bitter black coffee, and sat alone at my small, scratched kitchen table. My thumb was tightly bandaged, but my heart was completely numb, encased in a thick, impenetrable layer of cold realization. I thought everything that happened at the party was the absolute rock bottom of their cruelty. I thought nothing could possibly hurt me more than being thrown out of my own home like garbage. But then I picked up my smartphone from the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a new notification. It was a long, multi-paragraph text message directly from Cassidy. I opened it, and as I read the words on the screen, the blood in my veins completely turned to ice. I sat in the cold silence of my kitchen and read the text message from my sister. Reading every single word felt like taking a physical, calculated punch straight to the jaw. The message read, "You really know how to completely ruin a perfect, high-stakes night, Sloan. Mom was in absolute tears after you finally left because you profoundly embarrassed us in front of my most important angel investors and Beckett's entire family. You walked into a formal, elite event looking like a homeless garbage man. You really need to learn your place in this family and in society. To make up for the severe emotional distress you caused Mom and the potential financial damage you did to my professional reputation with the Winslow family, you need to send $5,000 to my bank account by Monday morning. Consider it a mandatory wedding gift. Also, do not even bother showing up to my official engagement dinner next Sunday. You are absolutely not welcome in my house ever again." I read the text again, and then a third time. $5,000. She wanted $5,000 for fabricated emotional distress. This was right after my mother physically assaulted me, destroyed my dinner, and humiliated me in front of 30 people. Before I could even process the sheer, staggering audacity of the message, my phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. The caller ID showed it was my Aunt Valerie. Valerie is my mother's younger sister, and she is the absolute definition of a flying monkey. She thrives on toxic gossip, creating drama, and acting as the self-appointed moral enforcer for my parents. I swiped to answer, pressing the phone to my ear. "Sloan, what on earth is wrong with you?" Valerie shrieked through the speaker, not even bothering to say hello. "Your father just called me in an absolute panic. He said you showed up to Cassidy's beautiful party, looking like a filthy vagrant, and deliberately tried to sabotage her relationship with Beckett. He also said he had to check the silverware after you left because he thinks you might have stolen things from the kitchen." "He said I stole from them?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifyingly quiet whisper. "Well, you are always desperate for money, Sloan," Valerie sneered, her voice dripping with venom and classist superiority. "It breaks your parents' hearts to see you struggling in the dirt while Cassidy is building a tech empire. The least you could do is apologize and send the money Cassidy asked for to make things right. You owe them that much for being such a constant disappointment." Something deep inside of me, a heavy, rusting iron chain of guilt and blind obligation that had held me back for my entire 30 years of life, suddenly and violently snapped. The desperate, pathetic little girl inside me who just wanted her mother to look at her with a shred of genuine pride, who just wanted her father to give her a simple, loving pat on the back, finally died a quiet, permanent death. There was absolutely no love in that family. There was no loyalty. There was no bond of blood. There was only a ravenous, demanding parasite, and it was certainly not me. "Valerie," I said, my voice completely devoid of any human emotion. "Do not ever call this number again." I hung up the phone before she could say another word. I did not type out an angry reply to Cassidy's message. I set my phone face down on the wooden table. The silence in my apartment was deafening, broken only by the distant, rhythmic hum of the massive industrial refrigerators in the warehouse below. I finished the last of my bitter coffee, stood up with a newfound, rigid posture, and walked down the echoing metal stairs to my main executive office on the warehouse floor. The office was quiet and smelled faintly of ozone, engine oil, and paperwork. I walked straight over to the large, incredibly heavy steel fireproof safe hidden behind a tall metal filing cabinet. I spun the mechanical combination dial, listened for the heavy, satisfying click of the internal tumblers, and pulled the thick metal door open. I reached past the neatly organized stacks of massive commercial business contracts, heavy liability insurance policies, and payroll documents, and pulled out a thick, aged, yellow manila envelope. I carried it over to my large mahogany desk, flicked on the bright fluorescent overhead light, and carefully unfastened the metal clasp. Inside was the official, heavily stamped, legally notarized property deed for the massive suburban mansion my parents and sister were currently sleeping in. The legal document clearly, unequivocally stated that the property was entirely owned by my corporate holding entity, of which I am the sole, 100% owner and chief executive officer. There was no outstanding mortgage. There was no bank involvement whatsoever. I owned every single brick in those walls, every blade of grass on that manicured lawn, and the very hardwood floor my mother had thrown my dinner onto. For 4 long years, I had allowed them to live in my house completely rent-free. I had paid the massive annual property taxes without a single complaint. I had secretly paid for the major roof repairs when a severe storm hit 2 years ago. I had paid the comprehensive homeowner's insurance. I had done all of this while Cassidy paraded around the country club, telling everyone who would listen that she was a brilliant, self-made tech genius who bought her struggling parents a mansion out of the sheer goodness of her heart. I had quietly funded their grand illusion while they treated me like a stray, diseased dog begging for scraps at their back door. I ran my calloused, rough fingers over the raised golden seal on the legal document. I had played the role of the silent, suffering protector for far too long. They completely mistook my silence for weakness. They mistook my dirty, working hands for a profound lack of power. I was going to show them exactly how much devastating power a blue-collar worker can hold. I was going to systematically burn down their fake reality and expose the absolute rot at the center of our family. I was going to tear off Cassidy's mask in front of the very billionaire she was trying to con. But first, I needed to know exactly how deep my sister's lies truly went. I needed ammunition. Before I reveal exactly how I exposed the darkest, most twisted secrets of my sister's fake empire, if you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family, please leave a comment saying, "I understand." And do not forget to subscribe to the channel. The hunt is officially on, and you will not believe what I found in the shadows. I did not act rashly over the weekend. I waited with cold, calculated patience until exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning. I did not go out to inspect the active commercial job sites like I normally would. Instead, I sat at my mahogany desk, stared at the property deed in front of me, and made 2 very important phone calls. An hour later, the heavy door to my office swung open. 2 people walked in. The first was Maeve, my company's senior corporate counsel. Maeve is sharp, utterly ruthless in legal negotiations, and easily the smartest legal mind I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. The second person was Declan. Declan is a former investigator for the Internal Revenue Service who now works in the private sector as a forensic financial auditor. I employ his firm to run deep background checks on massive commercial clients before we sign multi-million-dollar contracts. All right, Sloan, Maeve said, dropping her sleek leather briefcase onto my desk and taking a seat. You sounded like you were ready to start a war on the phone. What exactly is going on? I need you both to do a complete, deep dive forensic financial background check on my sister, Cassidy, I stated, my voice incredibly calm, completely devoid of the intense rage that had been boiling inside me all weekend. Pull absolutely everything you can legally access. Tax records, business filings, credit reports. She is constantly bragging about securing multi-million-dollar angel investments for her tech startup, but she is desperately demanding a $5,000 gift from me. I want to know exactly where her money is coming from, and more importantly, what she is actually doing. Declan nodded, flipping open his laptop. Give me a few hours. If she has a financial footprint, I will find it. I spent those agonizing hours reviewing complex equipment manifests for a new hospital build, desperately trying to keep my mind busy, but my blood was still running hot. I knew Cassidy was a chronic liar, a woman obsessed with appearances and status, but I did not know how deep the lies actually went. Exactly 3 hours later, Declan pushed his chair back from my desk, rubbing his eyes. He looked up at me, and his expression was completely grim. Sloan, your sister is not just a liar. She is a brazen, reckless criminal. What did you find? I asked, leaning forward, bracing my hands on the desk. Let's start with her grand tech empire, Declan said, pulling up a highly detailed dossier on his screen. She calls herself the founder and CEO of EcoVogue Solutions. She has been aggressively telling your parents, her elite social circle, and specifically the Winslow family, that she has developed a revolutionary artificial intelligence logistics application for sustainable fashion supply chains. She claims they have secured over $2 million in seed funding. And the reality? I asked. The reality is a complete, utter ghost town, Declan replied, shaking his head in disbelief. The company has exactly 0 employees, 0 payroll, and 0 incoming revenue. Their official registered corporate headquarters is a rented postal box in a rundown strip mall right next to a discount dry cleaner. But what about the technology? Maeve interjected, frowning. She presented a massive technical portfolio to Winslow's investment board. She had schematics. I read about it in a society magazine. Declan let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He turned his laptop screen toward us. This is the most insane part. I had my IT guys look at the core technical schematics she submitted in her public patent application. Sloan, she did not invent anything. She stole from you. I stared at the screen in total shock. Displayed next to Cassidy's supposedly revolutionary AI supply chain diagram was a familiar set of blueprints. Those are the commercial HVAC ventilation schematics I designed for the Underground Transit Authority project 3 years ago, I whispered, recognizing my own drafting marks. Exactly, Declan confirmed. She literally took your old industrial ventilation blueprints, changed the background color to a sleek dark mode, slapped some meaningless tech buzzwords over the airflow valves, and claimed it was an AI data node network. She used your hard work to con a billionaire. My vision actually blurred with rage. The audacity was staggering. But Declan was not finished. Now let's talk about her lifestyle, Declan continued, pulling a secondary, heavily redacted document from his printer and sliding it across the desk. You know that sleek, brand new white Range Rover she drives around town? The one she posts all over her social media, claiming she bought it with pure cash from her latest funding round. Yeah, I know it, I nodded, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. She did not buy it, Declan said flatly. It is leased. And she is definitely not the one paying the $3,500 monthly premium. Who is? I asked, dread washing over me. Declan tapped the paper. You are. Or rather, your company is. I snatched the document from the desk. It was a copy of a commercial vehicle lease agreement. I scanned the corporate letterhead, my eyes widening. What? That is literally impossible. I never signed this document. I would never authorize this. Look closely at the billing information at the bottom, Maeve instructed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the page. Think back to 2 years ago. Remember when you had that terrible accident on the high-rise job site? You were stuck in the hospital for 3 weeks with a shattered leg. I remembered perfectly. I was in agonizing pain, heavily medicated on strong painkillers, and I completely trusted my own flesh and blood sister to handle my personal affairs while I was incapacitated. I had given Cassidy a high-limit corporate emergency credit card to pay for my personal medical expenses, hospital copays, and to keep my household bills running. She memorized the card details, Declan explained, his voice rising in anger. She set up a recurring automated monthly draft through a completely fake third-party shell vendor that perfectly mimics a standard HVAC material supply charge. It has been hiding in your company's quarterly expense reports under miscellaneous parts for 20 months. She has been using your hard-earned corporate funds to lease a luxury SUV to fake her wealthy lifestyle. He was using the very money I bled for to look like a queen to her high society friends, while my parents called me a worthless, dirty parasite. Cancel the card immediately, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Already done, Maeve replied sharply. But that is not all, Declan said, his voice suddenly turning very quiet. He did not look triumphant anymore. He looked incredibly sad. Sloane, you need to brace yourself for this last part. It is bad. What she did to your company is fraud. But what she did to your parents, it crosses the line into pure evil. I looked sharply at Declan. His face was incredibly grim. His eyes filled with genuine, heartbreaking pity. I absolutely hated that look. I was a fighter, not a victim. I braced my hands flat against the mahogany desk, feeling the solid wood beneath my palms to ground myself. Tell me everything, I ordered, my voice hard as concrete. Declan reached into his thick leather briefcase and pulled out a final, heavily stapled document. It was a certified, official bank statement showing a massive, catastrophic transfer of funds. Your parents had a dedicated retirement savings account, Declan explained softly, watching my reaction carefully. A standard investment portfolio they had been diligently contributing to for over 30 years. It was their entire safety net after the bankruptcy. It had a balance of exactly $200,000. I know all about that specific account, I said, my brow furrowing in deep confusion. My dad used to talk about it all the time. He said it was his untouchable safety net. It was the only tangible thing he managed to legally save and protect from the bankruptcy courts 4 years ago. Declan pointed a pen at a glaring red line item dated exactly 6 months ago. 6 months ago, that entire retirement account was fully liquidated. The penalty fees for early withdrawal were massive, but the cash was pulled. $200,000 withdrawn in a single massive cashier's check. And it was deposited directly into Cassidy's personal, unsecured checking account. My heart physically stopped beating for a second. $200,000. Every single penny my parents had to their name to survive their fragile old age, to pay for their medical bills, to simply eat. Cassidy had stolen all of it. How in the hell did she get access to that? I asked, my voice trembling with a suppressed, violent rage that threatened to boil over. She somehow convinced them to sign a sweeping power of attorney document under the innocent guise of helping them legally manage their estate, Maeve said, her voice laced with venom. She drained them completely dry to fund her fake lifestyle, to buy those custom designer gowns, to pay for the obscenely expensive dinners to impress Beckett's family, and to fund the fake marketing for her non-existent startup. But the horrific financial theft was not even the worst part. A sudden, jarring memory slammed into my mind like a runaway freight train. Exactly 2 months ago, my father had called me late at night. He sounded heavily drunk and incredibly, terrifyingly angry. I remembered his exact words, slurred but viciously clear in their intent. Sloane, our retirement account was hacked. The money is completely gone. I know it was you. I know you stole it to buy that new fleet of shiny service vans for your dirty little mechanic shop. Cassidy looked into the bank records and traced the digital signature directly to your industrial park. I am not calling the police because I will not let you drag our prestigious family name through the mud with a criminal trial. But you are dead to me. Consider that stolen money the last thing you will ever get from us. I had been so wildly confused at the time. I swore to him on my life that I did not take a single dime. I even offered to hire an independent cyber investigator for him using my own money. He had just cursed at me and hung up the phone. The horrific realization hit me with such immense force, I physically gasped for air, clutching my chest. Cassidy had stolen our parents' entire life savings. And when they finally realized the massive sum of money was missing, Cassidy had immediately, flawlessly framed me for the theft. She convinced them with fake digital signatures and technical jargon that I was a bitter criminal who stole their retirement to selfishly fund my business. "It gets worse, Sloan," Declan said softly, sliding one final piece of paper toward me. "I pulled the email server records from your parents' house. Your mother, Lorelei, she knew." I stared at Declan, unable to comprehend his words. "What do you mean she knew?" "Look at this email," Declan pointed. 2 months ago, right before your father called to accuse you, Lorelei found the actual bank transfer receipt in Cassidy's room. She confronted Cassidy in an email. Cassidy admitted to taking the money, saying she desperately needed it to secure the Winslow investment and promised to pay it back tenfold. Your mother realized the truth. My hands began to shake. "And she did nothing?" "She did worse than nothing," Maeve said, her voice filled with disgust. She replied to Cassidy, telling her to wipe the computer, and suggested they blame you to protect Cassidy's reputation with Beckett's family. Your mother willfully chose to let you take the blame for a felony theft to protect her golden child's fake image. That was exactly why my mother looked at me with such pure, unadulterated hatred at the party. She was not just disgusted by my clothes. She was violently projecting her own immense guilt onto me. They truly thought they were harboring a thief, and my mother was the one orchestrating the entire lie. They blindly, willingly accepted that their golden child was a saintly victim, and their blue-collar daughter was a thieving, malicious monster. I stood up slowly from my mahogany desk. The anger inside me was no longer hot, explosive, or loud. It had turned into something incredibly dark, cold, and terrifyingly heavy. I walked over to the small, cheap mirror hanging on the back of my office door. I looked at my reflection. I looked at my tired, bloodshot eyes, the permanent dirt under my fingernails, the cheap flannel shirt that I wore like a uniform. I raised my right fist and punched the mirror with all my strength. The glass shattered outward in a massive spiderweb of sharp cracks, cutting my knuckles deeply. Thick, dark red blood began to drip freely from my hand onto the gray concrete floor, but I did not feel any physical pain. The very last shred of empathy, the last tiny, lingering piece of familial obligation I had left in my soul, died right there in that cold office. "Sloan," Maeve shouted, jumping out of her chair in shock. I slowly turned to her, grabbing a white towel to wrap around my bleeding hand. My voice was completely devoid of any human emotion. "Maeve, prepare the documents I ordered. Draft a formal, legally binding eviction notice for the residential property. Draft a formal, uncompromising demand for the immediate repossession of the leased vehicle. Prepare a civil lawsuit for corporate embezzlement with maximum damages. And compile all of this evidence for the police." "When do we serve them?" Maeve asked quietly, her eyes wide with understanding. "Next Sunday," I replied, staring at my bloody knuckles. "Cassidy is hosting her official, massive engagement garden party with the Winslow family. We are going to attend, and we are going to burn her fake kingdom to ash in front of every single billionaire she has ever lied to." If you feel a sense of satisfaction as the truth begins to be revealed and are eager to see the most brutal revenge, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you very much. The rest of that Friday passed in a heavy, suffocating blur. I did not leave my industrial warehouse. After Maeve and Declan left my office, I walked out onto the massive, echoing concrete floor of the main shop. The air smelled strongly of cut steel, ozone from the welding torches, and heavy machine oil. It was a smell that usually brought me immense comfort, a sharp reminder of the real, tangible world I had built from absolutely nothing. But today, the smell just made my stomach churn. I stood near a massive rack of copper piping, staring blankly at the sparks flying from a grinder in the distance. That was when Gideon found me. Gideon is my senior foreman, a 55-year-old mountain of a man with a thick gray beard and hands that look like they were carved out of solid oak. He had been with me since the very first day I bought the company. He taught me how to bid on massive commercial contracts, how to handle ruthless union bosses, and most importantly, how to stand my ground in a male-dominated industry. He walked over, wiped his greasy hands on a red shop rag, and handed me a steaming cup of bitter black coffee in a battered thermos. He looked at my hand, which was now heavily wrapped in thick white gauze, and then he looked up at my face. He did not ask what had happened. He had seen my parents before. He knew exactly how they treated me, and he harbored a deep, simmering hatred for their pretentious, toxic behavior. "You have that look in your eye, Sloane," Gideon said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that easily cut through the loud noise of the active workshop. "That exact same look you get right before we rip out a rotten foundation and pour a brand new one." I took a sip of the burning hot coffee, letting the caffeine shock my system. "The foundation is completely rotten, Gideon. Right down to the bedrock. I found out today that my sister has been stealing from the company. And my parents, they helped her cover up the theft of their own retirement fund, just so they could blame me for it." Gideon's joy tightened. The easygoing warmth in his eyes instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, protective fury. He leaned against the heavy steel rack, crossing his massive arms. "Blood does not always mean family, boss. Sometimes, blood is just a biological accident. Do not hold back. Do not show them an ounce of mercy just because you share a last name. You tear that rotten structure down to the dirt. You do not owe them a single thing. Banish those parasites from your life." Those words, coming from a man who had acted more like a genuine father to me in 5 years than Thatcher ever had in 30, were the exact validation I needed. The tiny, lingering sliver of guilt regarding what I was about to do to my parents completely evaporated. Saturday was a day of absolute, methodical preparation. The calm before the massive hurricane. I sat at my dining table in my loft apartment, surrounded by neat stacks of highly sensitive legal documents Maeve had sent over by encrypted courier. I carefully organized the forensic financial reports into premium, thick red envelopes. I sealed the official eviction notice in a crisp white folder. I took the undeniable proof of the stolen retirement funds and placed it in a clear plastic binder. Every single document was a loaded weapon, perfectly calibrated to destroy a specific part of Cassidy's fake empire. I did not wear my flannel shirt or my heavy work boots on Sunday morning. I opened the small closet in my bedroom and pulled out a custom-tailored, dark charcoal gray suit that I kept strictly for high-level federal contract negotiations. It was sharp, unforgiving, and projected an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and polished black leather Oxfords. I pulled my hair back into a tight, professional knot. I looked in the mirror, and the dirty, grease-stained scapegoat was completely gone. The executioner was staring back at me. The weather that Sunday afternoon was absolutely picture-perfect, which only made the impending destruction feel even more poetic. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless azure blue, and a gentle, warm breeze swept through the manicured suburban neighborhood. Cassidy's official, high society engagement garden party was in full swing on the sprawling, perfectly green back lawn of the massive mansion. I parked my personal vehicle, a sleek, understated black SUV that I rarely drove, a full block away and walked toward the property with Maeve right by my side. From the sidewalk, I could hear the soft, elegant sounds of a live string quartet playing classical music. The expensive caterers were walking around the patio with polished silver trays, serving expensive champagne and delicate, ridiculous appetizers. Beckett's entire aristocratic family was in attendance. His father, the ruthless billionaire commercial real estate tycoon named Winslow, was standing near the pristine, sparkling swimming pool. Winslow was smoking a premium Cuban cigar and laughing loudly at something Cassidy had just said. My golden child sister was dressed in a breathtaking, custom-designed white silk gown, looking every bit the wealthy, wildly successful tech entrepreneur she pretended to be. She was practically glowing with unearned pride, her fake diamond rings sparkling under the afternoon sun. My parents, Thatcher and Lorelei, were aggressively mingling with the high society guests, holding their crystal glasses and looking absolutely intoxicated by the sheer wealth surrounding them. They were living their ultimate, desperate fantasy, completely supported by a fragile foundation of massive lies and stolen money. I checked my heavy steel watch. It was exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right on schedule. I looked at Maeve, who gave me a single, sharp nod. The trap was set. The audience was captive. But what they did not know was that the very ground they were standing on was about to be pulled out from under them. The elegant, peaceful atmosphere of the billionaire garden party was violently, abruptly shattered. An incredibly loud, grinding roar of a massive commercial diesel engine echoed down the quiet, tree-lined suburban street. A gigantic, heavy-duty flatbed tow truck, painted a blindingly bright industrial yellow and proudly bearing the massive black logo of my commercial contracting company, backed aggressively up the long, paved driveway of the mansion. The truck's heavy air brakes hissed loudly, like an angry dragon exhaling, and the bright orange warning lights on the roof flashed in a rapid, blinding rhythm, completely drowning out the soft, delicate music of the string quartet. The wealthy guests instantly stopped talking, turning their heads in utter, terrified confusion. My mother nearly dropped her expensive crystal champagne glass, the liquid splashing onto her shoes. Cassidy's arrogant, victorious smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, panicked confusion. The tow truck driver, a huge, heavily tattooed man named Marcus, who worked as a senior subcontractor for my business, hopped out of the tall cab. He did not care about the fancy tailored suits or the expensive designer dresses. He walked straight over to the sleek, pristine white Range Rover parked prominently at the very top of the driveway. It was the exact vehicle Cassidy used as her ultimate status symbol to impress the Winslow family. Marcus unrolled a heavy, thick steel cable from the back of the flatbed, the metal clanking loudly and aggressively against the concrete, and began hooking it securely to the front axle of the luxury sports utility vehicle. "Hey, what in the hell do you think you are doing?" Cassidy screamed, dropping her drink onto the manicured grass and sprinting toward the driveway, her face turning a bright, frantic shade of crimson. "Get your filthy hands off my car. I will have you arrested for grand theft right now. Call the police." Winslow, the powerful billionaire father, frowned deeply and followed Cassidy, looking highly suspicious of the sudden, chaotic intrusion. My parents rushed over as well, my father yelling at the driver to stop immediately, his voice cracking with panic. Marcus did not even blink. He finished securing the heavy steel hook, wiped his greasy hands on a shop rag, and pulled a heavy metal clipboard from his canvas jacket. "I am executing a legal corporate repossession order," Lady Marcus said, his voice a deep, intimidating rumble that easily carried over the murmurs of the shocked guests. "This vehicle is the legal property of a commercial leasing agency, and the corporate entity paying the massive monthly premium has officially and permanently revoked your driving privileges. You are out of your mind. I bought this car with cash from my startup funding." Cassidy lied loudly, sweating profusely as she looked nervously at her future father-in-law, who was now staring at her with cold, calculating eyes. "This is a massive mistake. Show me the paperwork right now." Marcus sighed heavily, pulled a verified, stamped copy of the lease agreement from his clipboard, and shoved it hard against Cassidy's chest. "Read it and weep, fake tech genius. The vehicle is leased to Sloan's Industrial Solutions. The chief executive officer canceled the stolen corporate credit card you were using and ordered the immediate seizure of the asset. Step away from the winch line before you get hurt." Cassidy stared at the piece of paper, her perfectly manicured hands shaking violently. Her eyes went wide with pure, unadulterated terror. She knew that company name. She knew exactly whose company that was. The grand lie was unraveling in real time, right in front of the very billionaire she had tried so desperately to con. Winslow stepped forward, his eyes narrowing into dangerous, cold slits. "Cassidy, what exactly is going on here? Why is a commercial tow truck repossessing your vehicle? You specifically told my investment board that you own this asset outright." Before Cassidy could formulate another desperate, pathetic lie, the loud mechanical whine of the tow truck winch engaged. The beautiful white Range Rover was slowly, agonizingly dragged up the metal ramps onto the flatbed truck. She cannot answer you, Mr. Winslow, because she has never owned a single thing in her entire pathetic life. My calm, loud, perfectly projected voice cut through the heavy tension like a newly sharpened blade. The crowd of wealthy guests parted instinctively. I walked slowly down the paved driveway, my hands casually tucked into the pockets of my dark charcoal suit. Maeve walked silently right beside me, holding the thick, heavy red envelopes. I was no longer the dirty, grease-stained laborer they had thrown out like garbage just 2 days ago. I was the executioner, and I had arrived to collect my massive debts. If they thought the tow truck was a nightmare, they had absolutely no idea what was coming next. The absolute silence that fell over the garden party was physically suffocating. 30 pairs of wealthy, highly judgmental eyes shifted from the white SUV being strapped down on the truck directly to me, standing confidently at the end of the driveway. My mother, Lorelei, turned completely, ghostly white, all the blood draining from her face. My father, Thatcher, gripped his fists so tightly his knuckles cracked. He stepped forward, his face contorted in a mask of furious, blind rage. Sloane, my father roared, completely losing his temper in front of the aristocratic guests. What is the meaning of this? How dare you show your face here after what you did on Friday? Are you the one behind this ridiculous prank with the tow truck? I will have you thrown in a jail cell for harassing your sister. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked my father dead in the eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. It is not a prank, Thatcher, I said, my voice steady and echoing across the lawn. I refuse to call him Dad ever again. It is a legal repossession. Cassidy has been illegally leasing that vehicle using stolen corporate credit card numbers belonging to my commercial contracting business. I simply took back what was bought with my money. You are a vicious liar, my mother screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, looking frantically around at the whispering guests. You are just a jealous, bitter mechanic. You stole our retirement money to fund your dirty little shop. And now you are trying to ruin your sister's beautiful engagement. Somebody call the police and have this parasite removed from the property. I smiled. It was a cold, entirely humorless smile. I turned my head slightly and nodded to Maeve. Before we drop the absolute biggest bombshells that will ruin this family forever, if you are enjoying watching this toxic sister get exactly what she deserves, hit the like button right now. The truth is about to destroy everything they hold dear. Maeve stepped forward, radiating absolute, terrifying professional authority. She did not yell. She walked straight over to the heavy glass patio table in the exact center of the lawn, completely surrounded by the shocked, whispering guests. She raised the thick stack of red envelopes high in the air and slammed them down onto the glass with a loud, cracking thud that made several people physically jump. My name is Maeve, she announced clearly, her voice cutting through the whispers like a serrated knife. I am the senior corporate counsel for Sloane's Industrial Solutions. Inside these folders is the absolute, undeniable legal truth regarding the fraudulent existence of Cassidy. She opened the first envelope and pulled out a single, heavy piece of paper with a raised golden county seal. First, Maeve said, holding the paper up for Winslow and the rest of the guests to clearly see, this is the official, notarized county property deed for this exact address. You have all been told that Cassidy purchased this multi-million-dollar estate using her vast tech investments to generously save her parents from bankruptcy. That is a complete, deliberate fabrication. She dropped the deed onto the glass table. This entire property was purchased 4 years ago in pure cash by a limited liability holding company. That company is 100% solely owned by my client, Sloane. Cassidy has never owned this house. She does not pay the massive property taxes. She does not pay the insurance. She is a non-paying, parasitic guest living entirely off the silent, uncredited charity of her older sister. My parents froze completely. The arrogant superiority entirely melted off their faces, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. They stared at the piece of paper on the table as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. My father's knees actually buckled slightly, and he had to desperately grab the back of a wrought iron lawn chair to keep himself from collapsing. They were standing on my grass. They were entertaining on my patio. They had violently thrown me out of my own home. That is impossible, my father stammered, his voice weak, hollow, and trembling. He looked at Cassidy. Cassidy, tell them it is a lie. Tell them you bought this house for us. Cassidy could not speak. She was hyperventilating, her eyes darting frantically around the manicured yard, desperately looking for an escape route that simply did not exist. But Maeve was not even close to being finished. She reached into the second envelope. Second, we have the matter of EcoVogue Solutions, Maeve continued, her voice turning completely merciless as she pulled out the thick IT forensics report. Mr. Winslow, my client's private investigator audited the tech company your son is investing in. EcoVogue Solutions has 0 employees and 0 revenue. But more importantly, the proprietary artificial intelligence code she presented to your board to secure your backing is completely fake. Winslow stepped aggressively toward the table, snatching the report from Maeve's hand. The schematics she provided you, Maeve stated loudly, are actually stolen, outdated commercial ventilation blueprints that my client designed for an underground transit project 3 years ago. She changed the colors, added buzzwords, and presented it as AI. It is massive corporate fraud. Winslow's face turned a terrifying shade of purple. He looked from the report to Cassidy, his eyes burning with billionaire wrath. You tried to con my family with stolen air conditioning blueprints, he growled, his voice vibrating with absolute menace. No, Beckett knew. Cassidy suddenly shrieked, making the most desperate, foolish mistake of her life. Cassidy pointed a shaking finger directly at her fiancé. Beckett told me to do it. He knew I did not have the code. He said we could use your investment money to hire real coders later. He is in on it. Beckett, who had been standing in silent shock, recoiled as if he had been physically struck. A look of pure, visceral revulsion washed over his handsome face. Are you insane? Beckett yelled, stepping away from her. I never said that. I believed your lies just like my father did. You are a psychotic liar. And speaking of lies, Maeve interrupted, pulling one final piece of paper from the last envelope. Let us talk about that beautiful diamond engagement ring on your finger, Cassidy. Cassidy gasped, instinctively clutching her left hand to her chest. This is a certified credit card statement, Maeve announced to the crowd. It details a specific purchase made exactly 3 months ago at a high-end jewelry boutique downtown. The total charge was $45,000. That charge was fraudulently run through my client's stolen corporate expense account. The crowd gasped loudly. But Maeve held up a second, smaller receipt. However, the $45,000 receipt was completely forged, Maeve revealed, dropping the ultimate bombshell. The jewelry store confirmed that Cassidy actually purchased a cheap, lab-grown moissanite replica ring for exactly $500. She forged the massive receipt to justify draining $44,500 in pure cash from the stolen credit card to fund her designer wardrobe. The ring she is wearing right now is a cheap, $500 fake. I watched Cassidy's soul completely leave her body. Her entire fake, carefully constructed billionaire persona shattered into a million tiny, irreparable pieces. I noticed a woman standing near the back of the patio, rapidly scribbling notes in a leather journal. It was Blair, a notorious reporter for a high society magazine who had been invited by the Winslows. The destruction of Cassidy was not just going to be a family secret, it was going to be tomorrow's front-page socialite scandal. Beckett stared at the fake ring on Cassidy's finger, his face contorted in absolute disgust. He slowly reached down to his wrist, unclasped the incredibly expensive, limited edition gold watch that Cassidy had supposedly bought him as an engagement gift, and threw it forcefully onto the grass. Do not ever contact me or my family again, Beckett stated, his voice like cracking ice. He turned his back on her completely. Winslow did not yell. Billionaires do not need to yell. He calmly pulled a sleek silver phone from his jacket pocket and dialed a number. Get my security team, Winslow ordered quietly into the phone. And call the Economic Crimes Division of the police department. Tell them I have a suspect detained for attempted corporate wire fraud." Cassidy let out a horrible, strangled gasp. She stumbled backward, her expensive silk dress twisting around her legs. She fell hard onto her knees in the dirt, completely destroying the pristine white fabric. She looked at our parents. "Mom, Dad, do something." Cassidy wailed hysterically, tears completely ruining her expensive makeup. "They are going to arrest me. Tell them Sloan is lying." But Thatcher and Lorelai were completely broken. The sheer, overwhelming weight of the evidence had crushed their delusions. My mother, the woman who had proudly thrown my food against the wall, sank heavily onto the grass next to her golden child. She did not reach out to hug Cassidy. She just stared at her with a look of absolute, soul-shattering devastation. "You stole our retirement," Lorelai whispered, her voice cracking in pure hysteria. She finally realized that her attempt to cover up Cassidy's theft had ultimately destroyed them all. "You lied to us about the house. You left us with absolutely nothing. We are going to be homeless because of your pathetic vanity. You enabled me." Cassidy screamed back at her own mother, viciously turning on the woman who had worshipped her. "You loved the fake money. You loved bragging to your friends. You hated Sloan just as much as I did. You deserve this." The sound of approaching police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The aristocratic guests were rapidly fleeing the garden, desperate to avoid being associated with the massive scandal. I walked slowly over to the glass table. I picked up the crisp white folder containing the final legal document. I walked over to where my father was sitting, his face buried in his hands, completely paralyzed by shock. I dropped the folder directly into his lap. "What is this?" my father whispered, his voice broken and hollow, not even daring to look up at my face. "That is a formal, legally binding eviction notice," I said smoothly, feeling a deep, profound sense of closure washing over my entire body. "You have all been living rent-free in my property while actively treating me like absolute garbage. You let that lying parasite steal your retirement, and you gladly blamed me for it. You chose her over me. Now you get to suffer with her." The police cruisers pulled aggressively into the driveway. Four heavily armed officers marched onto the patio. Winslow pointed directly at Cassidy. The officers did not hesitate. They grabbed Cassidy by the arms, hauled her roughly to her feet, and slapped heavy steel handcuffs onto her wrists right there in front of the wreckage of her engagement party. "You have exactly 3 days to pack up your belongings and vacate my premises," I said, looking down at my parents one last time. "If you are not completely gone by Wednesday morning, I will have the county sheriff physically drag you out onto the curb. Do not test me." I turned my back on my destroyed family and walked down the driveway with Maeve. The massive yellow tow truck was already driving away, carrying the stolen Range Rover with it. They thought the nightmare was over, but the final, humiliating reality of their new life was just about to begin. Wednesday morning arrived, cold, gray, and heavily overcast. It was the absolute deadline. The third and final day of the legal eviction notice I had served my family. I did not go to the warehouse. Instead, I parked my heavy, rusty pickup truck directly across the street from the massive suburban mansion. I sat quietly in the driver's seat with the engine turned off, holding a thermos of hot black coffee. I was not there to gloat or mock them. I was there as the legal property owner, waiting to ensure that the massive toxic infection was finally, permanently removed from my valuable asset. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, a marked county sheriff's cruiser pulled slowly up the long, paved driveway. The officer knocked loudly on the grand double doors. A few moments later, the door slowly opened. Thatcher and Lorelai walked out. They looked nothing like the arrogant, upper-class socialites from the garden party. They looked completely disheveled, exhausted, and broken. They were dragging 2 cheap, battered plastic suitcases behind them. The illusion of their elegance was entirely gone. They had exactly $0 to their name, no golden child to worship, and absolutely nowhere to go. But as they walked down the driveway toward the street, Lorelai stopped. She looked across the road and saw my truck. She whispered something to Thatcher, and then, shockingly, she began walking directly toward my driver's side window. I rolled the window down a few inches, keeping my face completely blank. Lorelei's face was covered in fake, dramatic tears. She clutched her hands to her chest in a theatrical display of maternal sorrow. "Sloane, my beautiful daughter," she sobbed, her voice dripping with manufactured desperation. "Please, you have to forgive us. We were completely brainwashed by Cassidy. We did not know she was stealing. We love you so much. Please, do not throw your own flesh and blood out onto the cold street. Let us stay in the guest house. We will do anything." I stared at her. For a split second, I wondered how she could possibly pivot so quickly from pure hatred to begging. But then, my eyes caught a tiny, metallic glint inside the open pocket of her designer purse. It was a digital voice recorder, and the small red recording light was blinking. She was not apologizing. She was trying to bait me. She was desperately hoping I would scream at her, threaten her, or say something legally compromising so she could sue me for emotional distress or extort a massive financial settlement from my company. Even in her absolute darkest hour, she was still a venomous, calculating parasite trying to drain me. I smiled. A genuine, terrifyingly bright smile. "Mother," I said loudly and clearly, leaning toward the window. "I want you to look up at the eaves of the roof. Do you see those small black domes? Those are high-definition security cameras with highly sensitive audio microphones. I installed them 2 years ago. They record directly to a secure cloud server. They captured everything, including the conversation you and Thatcher had on the patio at 6 o'clock this morning, where you explicitly planned to bait me into a recorded argument to extort a settlement payout." Lorelei's fake tears instantly vanished. Her mouth dropped open in pure shock. "The sheriff is standing right behind you," I continued, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "If you do not turn around and walk away right now, I will show him the footage of your attempted extortion, and you will share a prison cell with Cassidy. Walk away." Lorelei slammed her purse shut. The venom returned to her eyes, completely unmasked. She turned around, grabbed her cheap plastic suitcase, and marched down the sidewalk with Thatcher trailing pathetically behind her. I watched them walk until they disappeared around the corner, heading toward the bus stop. I rolled up my window, put the heavy truck into gear, and drove away. The toxic family had completely consumed itself, and I was finally, permanently free from the wreckage. Exactly 1 week later, the sprawling suburban mansion was completely empty. I hired a massive professional moving company to box up the few worthless personal belongings my parents had left behind and shipped them to a cheap, short-term, rundown motel room they had managed to rent on the very dangerous outskirts of the city using a high-interest payday loan. I hired a commercial cleaning crew to violently scrub every single inch of the massive house, erasing all physical traces of the toxic people who had lived there. I did not sell the property. Instead, I drove a heavy wooden stake deep into the front lawn and bolted a bright, incredibly vibrant red "For Rent" sign to it. The house was a prime piece of suburban real estate, and it would generate a massive, consistent passive income for my corporate portfolio for decades to come. Every single dollar of rent collected would be a silent testament to my victory. It was late Friday evening. I was back in my comfortable, quiet loft apartment above the industrial warehouse, sitting at my computer desk. The heavy sounds of the city traffic were comfortably muffled by the thick brick walls. I opened my personal email inbox to clear out the daily spam, and I saw a new message. It was a massive, 3-page email from an address I recognized as my father's. I almost deleted it immediately without even reading it, but a small, lingering, morbid curiosity made me click open the text. The email was an absolute masterpiece of desperate, pathetic manipulation. It was thousands of words long, drenched in fake digital tears and incredibly hollow apologies. They wrote extensively about how deeply they missed their brilliant, hard-working daughter. They viciously threw Cassidy completely under the bus, blaming her sociopathic lies for entirely blinding them to the truth. They claimed they were helpless victims of her manipulation, just as much as I was. Then came the inevitable, entirely predictable pivot. The bottom paragraph detailed their horrific current living conditions. They complained bitterly about the toxic black mold in their cheap motel room, the dangerous drug dealers in the neighborhood, and their complete lack of money for basic groceries or their high blood pressure prescriptions. The email ended with a desperate, crawling plea. They begged me to let them move into the small spare storage room in my industrial loft. Or, failing that, they begged for a small, temporary loan of $20,000 to help them get back on their feet until they could find minimum wage jobs at a fast food restaurant. They promised they would spend the rest of their miserable lives making it up to me. I sat there in the quiet, blue glow of the computer monitor and slowly read the entire email from start to finish. I waited for the familiar, heavy ache in my chest. I waited for the crippling, suffocating guilt that usually accompanied disappointing my parents. I waited for the desperate, lingering childhood need to save them and earn their love. But I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger. There was no sadness. There was no overwhelming joy or manic, unhinged triumph. There was just a vast, incredibly peaceful emptiness. The heavy iron emotional chains that had dragged me down for 30 long years were completely, irrevocably broken. I finally saw them for exactly what they were. They were just parasites looking for a brand new host because their previous golden host was currently awaiting trial in a federal detention center. They did not love me. They loved my bank account. They loved the safety of my heavy steel doors. If Cassidy had not been arrested, if the startup had miraculously been real, they would still be living in that mansion, happily calling me a blue-collar failure. I moved my mouse cursor over the small trash can icon at the top of the screen. I did not type out an angry reply. I did not explain my feelings or demand closure. I simply clicked delete, and then I permanently blocked the email address. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked over to the large industrial window overlooking the massive warehouse yard. The bright security lights cast long, sharp shadows across the massive fleet of service vans bearing my company logo. I raised my hands and looked at them in the glass reflection. They were heavily calloused, rough, deeply scarred, and permanently stained with the faint dark traces of industrial grease and hard labor. My mother had called these hands filthy. My father had called them a massive embarrassment. Cassidy had thought they made me weak and easily manipulated. But these were the hands that had built an absolute empire out of nothing but sweat, blood, and raw determination. These were the hands that had quietly bought a mansion to save a dying family. And these were the exact same hands that had ruthlessly, systematically torn that fake family down to the dirt when they bit the hand that fed them. Blood does not make a family. Respect, loyalty, and unconditional support make a family. I had a family in the 30 hardworking men and women I employed who relied on me and respected me for my actual character, not a fabricated image. The sky outside my window was dark, but for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely, wonderfully free to breathe. I took back my dignity, my property, and my life, but it cost me the only biological family I will ever have. Did I go too far by taking back my house and leaving my parents homeless? Or did I simply give them the exact reality they created for themselves? If you were in my shoes, holding all the power after years of brutal abuse, would you have shown mercy, or would you have burned it all down? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this fake empire crumble, please hit the subscribe button, like the video, and ring the notification bell for more stories of ultimate payback.